This is the Trout Bitten Podcast.
Trout bitten. Trout bitten? Trout bitten.
Trout Bitten.
Trout bitten?
Yeah, Trout Bitten.
Trout bitten.
It's about trout.
Wild trout.
This is Trout Bitten.
This is the Trout Bitten Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Dominic Swentowski. I'm the owner of Trout Bitten and the author of troutbitten.com. Tonight, we're here to talk about spawning trout. Specifically, we're ready to tackle the ethics of fishing during the spawn, whether it's right or wrong to fish for trout that are actively in the process of making the next generation of trout. Moreover, where do these ideas of what's ethical or not come from? And why are the expectations confusing for a lot of anglers? Is it okay to be on the water while trout are spawning, or should we simply stay away during the spawning season and let trout do their own thing? We'll branch out into different trout species, and we'll especially highlight how different regions, different rivers, and different setups might require a different approach. So this topic can get a little contentious. Anglers have strong opinions about this, one way or the other. And for many people, there's not much middle ground. Now, we've covered this topic before, too, in a couple Q&A sessions in different seasons of the Trout Bitten Podcast, and we'll surely go over some of those same thoughts again. But this topic deserves its own podcast, and it's been on our list for a long while now. But listen, trust me when I say that none of us are here to tell you how to fish or when to fish. This topic, though, is one that each of us has given a lot of thought over the years. We've also seen anglers have a change of heart, and we've been around to witness some heated disagreements about this topic, too. So, trout fishing and the spawn. But first, let's say hi to the Trout Bitten Podcast crew. Dr. Trevor Smith is here. We missed you last week, buddy.
Yeah, I missed being here.
We all shared a little bit about ourselves because it's episode 1 of the starting into the third year of doing this. So we figured we'd backtrack a bit, just catch listeners up, maybe some new listeners, catch them up a little bit on, I don't know, who we are. Trevor, just what a little bit about yourself, bud.
Sure. I'm a Pennsylvania native, I would call myself. I grew up in Warren County on the banks of the Allegheny. Grew up fishing for bass for the most part.
Dirty fish.
Yeah.
Stinky bass.
Right. Started fly fishing up there in Warren in little small streams with a man named Clarence Baldwin, who taught me a lot. My uncle taught me more. Started fly fishing more as I got older. Spent some time in the military. I'm a family doctor now in State College, Pennsylvania. And yeah, love to get out fishing and hunting when I get the chance. Got 3 little kids.
Yeah, you do.
Like getting them out on the water as well. I've got a well-used hiking backpack that sees a lot of wear. My youngest, Jack, who's 4, is the current seat holder. So
that's a good
seat. All my kids love the outdoors. All my kids love fishing and want to get out with me as much as they can. So it's a blessing. It's good.
And you have a lot of wool.
A lot of wool. I own a lot of wool.
You are Dr. Wool.
I really do.
Right. You changed a lot of lives, Trevor, in many ways.
Change it. That's right.
He's a degree
Especially
in
with the
wool.
Well,
Master's degree in wool.
Yeah. Exactly. Proud graduate of Penn State University, who's going up against the Buckeyes this weekend. So,
Hey now.
Let's go. We
got a shot.
Let's go.
by the time this
Yeah, we do.
publishes, we will have won or lost.
Or won.
Let's not talk about.
I said
We're
one.
going in. We're going in heavy. We're going in swinging.
We'll
That's
see.
right.
All right. Hey, everybody else, just let's hear your voice real quick. Austin, say hi, bud.
Hey, how we doing?
Austin Dando right there. Let me hear Delly, Bill Dell.
Hey, you hear me all right?
Oh, yeah, we hear you all right. Stop looking like that.
He's single.
And then, Josh is doing some family traveling, I think, again.
Hmm.
And here's Matt Grobe out in Montana.
Did you just say Bill was single?
No, we went through
I
that. on the
echoed
last
your
podcast.
advice from last week, Grove.
Okay, we're back to
Move
that.
on.
Okay. Yeah, Bill Dell's single.
Is it still daylight out there, Matt?
It's getting dark. Yep, it's getting dark. It's that time of year.
Let's roll through a listener question. First one of the season. First one of season 9. Let's do a question real quick before we jump into fishing and trout spawning. Austin, you want to read this, bud? You know how to read? You're good at it.
I think I remember. We'll give it a shot. All right. This is from
Good.
Donald Huston.
Don't be nervous.
All right. Donald Huston by way of Instagram. He writes, "Hey Dom, I have a question that I would like to get a trout bitten opinion on. I know the consensus is if there's a truck parked at an access, then you keep going so everyone has space. This is a situation I run into from time to time, and I've been on both ends. You get to a spot and are getting ready by the truck, and another vehicle pulls in. This has happened a few times at more popular spots, so seeing a few trucks isn't uncommon. Maybe the people in the other truck came from fishing in a different section of water, so the waders are on, rods are rigged, and they're ready to go. So who gets the right of way? The guy who is physically there first, or the guy who is ready first? On another note, you've mentioned that you don't like when people sit on the bank and watch you fish. Why is that? I watch others fish from time to time and enjoy it. It's not necessarily to push them out, but to learn some new techniques. Thanks, Donald." All right, so that's a bit of a two-part question there. So why don't we start on the first part, which is, who gets the right of way in this situation?
It's the guy that was there first, physically. Hands down.
Yep.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you had your waders on. I always have my waders on. I go to sleep with my waders on.
That's right. Trevor goes to the river with his waders on. It's true.
I do.
It's an old Trevor
but
trick.
it's the guy that was at that spot first.
Absolutely.
But can we elaborate on that? Because, how big's the access, right? Like, if it's a big access, like I think back when I was reading Donald's question, I'm like, oh my gosh, he's calling me out because I'm like harping on the bridge access in Montana. Right. And I always tell people, like, one truck and get the out, right? Like, don't try to high hole me at the bridge access. Now, a fishing access with public land on the banks, I feel like is a little bit more palatable to have a truck or two there, if that makes sense.
Well, if they pull in, let's say it's 5 cars can fit in, and I don't really care how big or small it is. I think the thing to do is go, hey, buddy, which way are you going? You going upstream or down? If you got your waders on and that guy's just it's just rude to just rush to the river right in front of them. But you're right too, Matt. I mean, if it's big, wide Walmart
it's like, let's think
size.
a $3 bridge. You've been to $3 bridge, right?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, that thing's massive, right?
Yeah.
And it fits 15, 20 cars. I feel like going into it, I know that that's the way that access is.
Yeah,
I think if we have an access that's like a little more, intimate, where there are restrictions, it's like, okay, like, let's not fit 8 rigs in this, 2-car parking spot, to your point.
Yeah. I don't know why, but everybody seems to want to collect together. You really don't. I guess it's just human nature, maybe in some way, to want to be around each other. Maybe they're from out of town and they think like, hey, here's a good spot because there's already 3 cars here. Let's be the 4th one. But I know we don't really operate like that, and it just doesn't make any sense to me. And I don't care if I am from out of town. If I see whatever, I mean, I guess I've already picked the river because I have confidence in it. Mm-hmm. And for me, I don't want to be around other.
It can be seasonally dependent too. Like if it's the Green Dray catch and there are 7, 15, 20 cars at every access, and you end up at the access that has the least amount of cars or the one spot left that you're going to fit in.
Yeah.
Then I feel like the rules are a little bit more flexible because there's nowhere else for you to go. All you can do is hike down to the stream, see where people are at, and try to avoid them the best you can. But if it's like, a day like today or middle of the winter and there's not many other accesses or not many other people in the accesses throughout the stream you want to fish, then move on or absolutely yield to the person who's there first, or, at least give them the chance to explain their plan before you go in and hop right above them.
Yep. I think we're on Donald's side.
Yep.
What about the other question? He said that he talked about
sitting and watching.
I remember saying this in a podcast that like it bugs me when people will just stand there for a long period of time or even sit down and just watch you fish. I'm like, I didn't go fishing so I could be stared at. Again, there you go, situational. If there's 30 people around, you're going to stare at each other, right? Mm-hmm. Even when you're rigging up or something, I don't know, or if you're eating a sandwich. This is different. What's that?
It's Halloween. It's like the Michael Myers chant. The Michael Myers chant. It's like the guy with the Michael Myers mask sitting on the bank, creeping Dom out.
That's right. That's a good description. It creeps me out a little bit. I'm like, move on. And here's the other point on that. I wouldn't recommend watching what other fly anglers do on the river to learn techniques or to learn good techniques.
Yeah, I ignore you all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Trevor, have you ever seen Trevor fish? I try not to watch when I see Trevor out there.
My fishing isn't best watched. It's not a spectator sport.
It's not a spectator sport. I like that.
That's right. But I get what he's saying too. I mean, whatever, you're going to sit down,
especially
if you're real new to the game. And it is entertaining to watch other anglers. I'm not saying that I've never done that. I will say, when I watch other anglers, I do it from a location where they don't know I'm watching them. Know what I mean?
The sniper location.
I'm trying to give them that courtesy, honestly, of like, hey, you got your own space up there. Okay, I'm not trying to walk in on people. I don't like to disturb people. Golden rule, man. Like I don't want to be disturbed, so I don't do it to other people.
Yeah,
that's all.
I agree with you 100%. I think the problem is that fly fishing is a solitude sport for the most part, and if you're out there alone, and I do think it's different depending on where you choose to go. Like if you choose to fish, or whatever, you can bleep that out. But if you choose a really public access, you are acknowledging when you go there that you're not going to be alone. But for the most part, in hunting, nobody would even think. I mean, you shouldn't think twice about that. Like if somebody is hunting and somebody came up and watched you, I mean, that's like
a little space, bud.
Yeah, you might get an arrow in your leg.
Yeah, I know.
When we fish together, Dom and I often sit on the bank and note all the mistakes that the younger crew makes when they are fishing up the river.
Oh, you mean these guys?
Yeah.
or watch us catch fish.
I don't know if that happens very often.
You're just looking for some improvement.
Just a hater. All right. Hater. So Donald got the old email with 2 questions in there. That was slick of him, right? Pulled that trick. Pulled the old 2-question trick.
He's done that one before, I think.
Yeah.
2-banger.
Yeah.
2-banger.
Don't do it again. Let's move on. You guys ready? Everybody got a drink? You ready for this one? Don't piss anybody off. Okay? That's the goal. Grove goes, hey. He kind of raises his shoulder.
I'm not on here to make friends.
No. Okay. Well, that's why you're here.
Nah, just joking.
He's got that thing going for him. All right. Here we go then. Trout fishing and the spawn. I'm going to assume that we don't need to break down what happens while trout spawn or spend much time on that because we're here to talk more specifically about the question to fish or not to fish during that spawn. But here's a quick primer so that we're all on the same page with the listeners. Spawning takes place over a period of, I'm going to say 2 to 6 weeks, usually, in trout rivers. Sometimes in the main river, sometimes in tributaries. A trout nest is called a redd, where they lay the eggs, Those redds are sometimes very prevalent throughout the system, and other times they're extremely localized in just a small section of a river or stream. Not all trout are involved in the spawn. That's important to note. In fact, most are not involved in the spawn. Many trout that are spawning eat and follow other daily routines during the weeks when they're also spawning. Of course, some do not. They'll even wear themselves out while spawning a bit. Okay. And most trout involved in the spawn are larger. Most. In fact, we often see some of the largest trout in the system in like calf deep or knee deep water. Kind of out in the open, regardless of the time of the day or, sunlight or water conditions. And that is where a lot of the trouble begins. So guys, what's that trouble? What's the problem?
What's the problem? Larger brown trout
is the problem.
There's that species fires people up more than any other. I'm talking steelhead, rainbow trout, brook trout, cutthroat trout. Okay? You just said it perfectly, 2 to 6 weeks. In a state like Montana that has all 4 species reproducing in the spring and in the fall, you're basically left to fish the month of July.
Yeah, if you were to not fish during the spawn.
So anybody that wants to comment on it out here, they're all hypocrites.
Yeah,
they're all hypocrites because they neglect the spawn in the spring. And there's something about the brown trout, man. It's a jealousy fueled outrage that happens, and it only happens in the fall. Am I wrong for saying that?
Well, that's what I'm getting at. Is that I think the problem starts with the chasing of large brown trout.
Totally agree.
And all that goes along with that. Like you say, jealousy or the spot burning people are concerned about. And hey, maybe there's actually legitimate concern for sure that you're going to damage the fish. If you're catching them while they're spawning, very legitimate concern. But I think it's, like you said, it's the obsession with the brown trout especially, but then just larger fish, the chasing of larger fish. And they're right there, like I said, a lot of times in that shallow water where they spawn calf to knee deep.
Yeah, part of the problem is that there's the temptation there for anglers where fish maybe they don't see the rest of the year until this time.
Yeah.
And then, oh, wow, there's actually 2 of them, or there's 1 of them sitting right out there in the middle of this really nice, easy to wade water. I bet I could swing a streamer or an egg, or maybe I could even snag them. Put them in my net. I could get a really good picture of those fish. And that happens. That's not just something that you imagine. How many times have we actually discovered, or it's been, people do that. Unfortunately, it's real.
Whether it's after a fishing trip or at a backyard fire, you can bet the Trout Bitten crew has a case of New Trail Broken Heels along with us. It's honestly our favorite beer. This hazy IPA is smooth and full-bodied. Hand-selected Citra hops lead to notes of bright clementine and juicy ruby red grapefruit. Broken Heels is a keeper. New Trail beer is proudly brewed in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and delivered cold to your favorite craft beer retailer every week. At New Trail, it's not about being the best angler. It's about getting out there. So enjoy nature's moments and reward yourself for a day well fished with New Trail Broken Heels. It's Trout Bitten's favorite beer. As fly anglers and tires, we understand the value of having the right tool for the job. AvidMax.com offers over 20,000 products and the knowledge to help you find the right tool for your job, whether that be at the tying bench or on the water. Listeners of the Trout Bitten Podcast receive a special one-time discount code at AvidMax.com. Enter the code TB10 at checkout on full-priced items to save 10% off your order. Orders over $25 ship for free, so you can put more gas in your tank or beer in your cooler. For all things fly fishing and tying, elevate your game with AvidMax.
So here, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. So as an outdoorsman, and you think about hunting in general, when you hunt, you're hunting in the fall and you're hunting during the rut and the reproductive time of deer. And there's so much money and I don't want to say gear or different things that revolve around that rut. And basically in your success, that stuff is there to provide you success during that mating season. The same thing with spring gobbler. And so like from the hunting perspective, that's when animals are at their weakest, and that's when we try to take advantage of that. And it's odd from that vantage point that then when you start to talk about trout, it's viewed differently, right? Like if you think about it globally as an outdoorsman, that's the one differing opinion I see.
That's where the confusion comes in. It is confusing.
Right.
Well, and you can take it a step further because you can have it in fishing. How many people go to Alaska? How many people do you know that go to Alaska in September to fish eggs?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a global market, dude. Like,
yeah,
definitely. And it's accepted. You chuck a pegged egg in the entire state of Alaska, and it's okay there. Yep. Why is that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Why is it okay there?
Right.
Yeah, and it's all the lake run fish.
Yeah,
they're all running out of a lake to spawn.
Right. Steelhead. That's the thing. You're chasing them, like you said, during their weakest point. Really, perhaps their most vulnerable state.
So you have a whole industry pushing the steelhead. We'll talk about the Great Lakes region. I mean, there's an entire industry there that's making millions upon millions of dollars.
Yep.
Pushing the ambush of reproducing fish.
Yeah.
To Bill's point, it's just another. Yeah. But okay, so then we're siphoning off. Okay, that's okay. It's okay to murder a 8-point buck while it's breeding with a doe. But but by all means, do not that brown trout you caught, you some bitch. That was cheating. And let's face it, people, we all know them. They'll call out any catch that's made from
as
now
soon as it's
until
November. Every.
You ripped it off a red.
No matter what. Right.
The accusations
I know where you're
everywhere.
There's a red right behind that tree.
Trevor, I'd be interested to hear your perspective as an avid hunter.
Right. Why do you think it's different?
I think the culture surrounding hunting has always been more different, or it has been different than what has kind of developed out of fly fishing and that sort of. I think that fly fishing has at times been tempted to go beyond just conservation and into a little bit of moralizing and a little bit of just like, it comes along with the whole elitism and the discussion surrounding that, where I do think that hunters are there. There's no qualms about the fact that you're out, to harvest an animal. And I think that people that misunderstand hunters to be bloodthirsty killers do a great disservice, right? Yeah, exactly. Most avid hunters are great conservationists at heart.
Yeah.
And when they look across at the fishing industry, specifically, I would say fly fishing, I just think that there can sometimes be, it's just sort of funny that there isn't a little bit of more taste, I guess a little bit better taste of reality when it comes to what we're doing when we're fishing, even from the mortality rates of hooking and releasing fish. Some people don't kind of come to grips with that, but also the reality of many of the people that I've talked to that get really upset about fishing during the spawn also don't really realize that eggs are staying in redds until the spring, and they're hatching in the spring without any care, right? And so many of these same fishermen are fishing then throughout late winter and into the spring and walking all over redds because they don't even know how to identify a red, but they're really fixed on not fishing during this 4-week period of time that is fairly arbitrary, but is talked about a lot. So I think...
Yeah, I was going to...
No, go ahead.
I was going to ask you about the release specifically, because obviously when we're hunting during the rut, we're not looking to let a deer go after we shoot it.
Right.
Unlike a trout where we may, land it, take a picture and set it back. Do you think there's any difference in landing a fish off a red and bringing it home versus one that we release back to the stream, morally or ethically?
So I'm going to chime in on examples I have of that. And you can be as educated as you want to be, but if you're fishing a brand new stream, you have weird lighting, and let's say there's a Dom's favorite bug, the pseudocleon, right?
I was fishing that today.
Hatching in the fall.
Nice.
We can have prolific hatches in the fall, and you're fishing ahead of a riffle in an emerging hatch.
Yeah,
and by the time you get to the head of that riffle and look back, oh my goodness, the head of that riffle was actually a red, and I landed 3 colored up browns on that and let them go just as I would any other day. There's no way, I'm sorry, that has any impact on, and that's it. Honest mistake I see people make all the time out here. And I'll talk about sloop. Sloop, you can show them, there's a lot of weed beds out here. Okay. We have a lot of weeds in our system, and the weeds lift this time of year because they die. And with that, they bring up fresh gravel. Okay.
Yeah. That makes
it's
sense.
very easy to see.
Yeah.
You probably see it on some of your local streams. What's a red, and what's uprooted gravel from that dying? The whole thing's perplexing when you try to talk to someone about what that is and what that isn't. But all I'm saying is you can mistakenly catch fish that are on spawning grounds, not intending to catch them. And I don't think, it's like... it's going to be impactful to those fish, or those fish are going to like belly up and die because they're so gassed. Like, I just don't think that's the case. They're not going to eat. If they're that tired, they are not going to eat very aggressively from my experience. Those fish get lethargic post-spawn. Fishing tends to suck for a little bit, and it stinks for a little bit because they're recovering.
I think I would be curious to know, those are good, interesting points. In contrasting the fishing and hunting industry, the Game Commission does a really extensive job at publicizing the census of deer in Pennsylvania and what their expected and desired kill is in each wildlife management unit. And the whole state is broken into different parts, and there's different kills that they're looking for to maintain a healthy herd across the state. And I think what complicates this in fishing is, one, we have like stalking over wild trout populations going on. We have wild trout. We have purely stocked fisheries. And so I think a big part of the question has to sort of come back to what's the sustainability of the resource and what harvest would be best to maintain healthy populations in particular streams. And I don't know that we as fishermen are educated very well about that, or whether that type of information is even accessible. And so I do think there's like this nebulous nature to the management of brown trout, because we're sort of assuming that it's bad for the fishery to kill fish, right? And yet a certain fish kill might be optimal for food availability, for size of species, et cetera. And those would have to go into any conversation about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Dom, you can allude to it even more, but you hit it on the head on the fact that if you're not spending time out on your home water during the spawn, you're doing yourself a disservice from an education standpoint, learning where those fish tend to breed and all those things. I think you can become a better angler fishing during the spawn. I'm not talking about fishing for spawning trout. I'm saying fishing during the spawn to see what happens in your local waterway to become better educated, because there's really no other way to do it, right?
Yeah, as you know, that's been my argument for a long time. Wrote articles about it. We've acknowledged that before. It is about education for me. I don't know, and Trevor brought this up, I don't know how you can possibly understand where trout do spawn in your rivers if you're not there during the spawn, because as soon as they're done spawning, those reds silt over. You can't see them anymore. And those water conditions are going to change too. And in let's say that we're talking about the brown trout spawn here, and they're going to be done. They're going to be done in December, you know. And so let's say in January you go out, you're not going to know what you should avoid. You don't know the water type to avoid. I would argue that you'll do a lot more damage by walking through a pile of reds and displacing all those eggs, which are not going to live outside of the red, than you would if you'd accidentally caught a spawning fish like Matt described.
Right.
Can we back up though? And do you guys fish for spawning trout? I mean, do we or don't we? Do you guys fish, like actively fish for spawning trout?
No, not actively.
Right. I don't either.
No, never on purpose.
No, I didn't. Here's Deli. He's like, yeah. No.
Oh yeah. No.
Bill?
I honestly did when I first started fly fishing.
Oh, right. I
came in with like that because I had grown. I grew up in the outdoors hunting, and I was like, oh man, this is great. It's like taking candy from a baby.
Well, that's why I agree with what Matt says. And Matt, I'm sure you're kind of the same way. When I was younger in the game, didn't know a lot of stuff, or, didn't know much of anything. I didn't even understand what was going on. I mean, seriously, these days it's almost hard to avoid that kind of information. If you're hooked up to Instagram at all, everybody's going to tell you it's spawning season. Sure. And here's their set of rules for what you should be doing. Here's another set of rules from somebody else. But yeah, back then I didn't know. But now looking back, I go, I pretty much agree with Matt. They are not easy to fool, let's say. They're often just very focused on spawning.
Yeah, I agree.
There's some notion out there. It's not a notion. People say this all the time. Like, it's just so easy. They're like sitting ducks right there. Or it's like shooting fish in a barrel. They're so easy to fool because they're so aggressive when they're spawning. I don't find that to be true. Now, before the spawn is when I find them to be most aggressive, let's say for streamers. They're starting to turn on right now here.
Can I elaborate on that a little bit, Dom?
Please.
So when they're digging the reds, right? You see, we've all seen the pairs. Like, there's no way those fish are eating. Like, you can have a pair of fish and then the female's digging the gravel, and they're just not at that stage when you see fish. And you can, I mean, it is pretty cool to watch. You can see them, her digging the reds and the male fertilizing it on the back end. The time where what ends up happening is that male, there's a 4-day period that male will sit there to protect the bed. And at that point, that fish can come aggressive. And I would agree with Bill. That's when you can really get that fish to protect it, and he'll hit streamers or whatever. If you read about it, you can watch. Yeah, that's how it goes down.
That's interesting.
And then to your point, early in the season or early to spawn, right? And this goes into when is it?
I like that.
Brings up another question that's just popped in my head. When is it okay to stop fishing? Right? Like I know there's staging buckets. I have a bunch of them out here, and I know exactly what those fish are doing. They're not on reds. They're not digging.
Yeah, they're not even started yet, but
they're
getting
pissed.
Ready. Yeah,
they're pissed off, and it's fun fishing, and I love it. Is it like, I don't care. I catch 20 fish in one bucket, and I'm like, they're nice, colored up, beautiful browns, and they're getting ready for the dance. Like, what's wrong with that?
Right. You're fishing. If you care that much about the health of the trout, stop fishing. And I know that sounds you can hardly say anything like that out loud anymore, but we've talked about it. I wrote the article, Are We Taking the Safety of Trout Too Far? My answer is yes, I think we are. You have to be careful, because if you start telling people don't fish now, don't fish then, don't fish this way, don't fish that way, make sure you do all these things, and the health and safety of the trout is the most important thing, then the next thing you're going to tell them is stop fishing. And that's what's coming. I mean, that's, PETA will take over and they'll tell everybody not to. I'm serious,
Yeah, you're right.
You can't have it if you're going to fish, you're going to accidentally kill some fish regardless of the spawn and everything, Like we've all had accidents where we foul hook a fish in a bad way.
Absolutely.
And, it just happens.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Sorry, Dom, but there's got to be enough, like you guys have fish studies, right? Fish per mile. Yeah. Every state does. And same with Montana. Right now there's streams closed. Okay, there's
right.
3 famous streams that are shut down.
Yeah,
they shut down on September 30th, and the reasoning is because we need to let those brown trout spawn peacefully, because angling pressure could be affecting the trout populations. There's other things in mind, right? And I'm like, look, if this is a knee jerk, or you want to just take a deep breath and assess things, and we got to give the trout 8 months off, okay. But there's also just as many examples across the country, especially in your area, where fishing pressures increased, right? Likely in the fall. It's not like it is in summer, but it's probably higher than it's been. And the trout populations are the same, if not better. So there's also a lot of examples shooting that down all over the place. Yeah. So I don't agree with that theory that you should just stop fishing and it's going to magically let your fishery flourish.
I think we have that in the East too. Not as much as you do out there, but there's a few select streams on the East Coast that also kind of abide by those same guidelines and rules as to shut down for periods of time. But like we've already elaborated, they open back up in times where the reds are still vulnerable.
That's right. Nobody really educates about that.
But because it's like a closed versus open, once the open sign goes on, it's like, all right, no holds bar.
Well, so too much angler pressure. Right. Yeah. So below tailwaters a lot of times, or below a dam, on a tailwater, a lot of times, a lot of trout will spawn there. Like we know this. In many, or at least some of those areas, like South Holston, isn't it like that? There's a lot of the trout go up into one area to spawn. Bill, do you know this?
Yeah. So and they actually closed sections of the South Holston, right? Actually, until March.
Well, that might be a good idea, right? Because what we're saying about because again with this brown trout spawn, it's in March. Yeah, it probably is because it's in March when those eggs finally hatch. Yeah,
because they actually spawn later down there because of the
temperatures and stuff,
science stuff,
daylight stuff, temperatures.
Well, but anyway, I mean, you get to that point then where so much of the spawning is happening in one area, and if everybody knows that, and let's say you do have a whole bunch of angler pressure while those trout are trying to spawn, I mean, I agree, that's detrimental to the fishery. But like how? Let's describe how. If you had a bunch of anglers right where all the spawning is taking place for much of the river,
I mean, you're going to trample the reds.
Sure.
You're going to walk over top of them.
I think it moves the fish too. You've seen it.
Or they become nocturnal. I mean, I personally think they're going to, nature's still going to do its thing.
Oh, they do. I've taken my dog for a walk because you remember it's daylight savings time by then. And I've taken my dogs for a walk, beside some of our favorite rivers. And I'll spotlight areas where there's gravel there. I know it because I've seen it during the day. I don't know. I mean, I can't tell if they're actively spawning, but they're right there looking like they're spawning paired up. It's not like they just abandon those areas at night. So you're right. They become nocturnal. I guess all I'm saying is I think too many anglers in an area where all the spawning is taking place could actually do a lot of harm.
For sure.
It's going to disrupt the process. Absolutely.
So let's say you approach a piece of water and you find some reds and actively spawning fish. Will you fish around those reds? Will you, go up to a different section? Will you go up to a different section completely? Or what do you do when you actually approach one?
I actually ran into this weekend.
You found spawning fish this weekend?
Yeah.
Brook trout?
Brook trout.
Oh, gotcha.
So our our area, the trout seem to spawn anywhere from like now until December. It's a lot of rain-based stuff.
Yeah.
So when the streams actually get water volume in them, sometimes the fish will spawn really early.
Yep.
But anyway, so I didn't pick up on it. Like the first hole I fished, I saw a fish spook out of the tail, and I was like, okay, whatever. And then like the next one I came up to, I was like, oh, and I paid more attention. I was like, oh, okay, there's a couple spawning in here. And so like I just stopped kind of fishing the tail outs, and I was fishing a dry fly. It wasn't like I was, throwing eggs at them. But yeah, I just, at that point, I just kind of made the decision like, okay, I'm not going to fish the tail out just in the event of, potentially catching a spawning fish, because that's where all the gravel is in that little stream.
Sure.
But would you throw an egg if there was like a deep run around there? If you knew you were going to catch 20 fish?
Not with brook trout.
What about with browns?
Not during the spawn. I don't know. I'm not a big egg guy.
You fish them in the winter.
That is an interesting question, because
it is.
I think
where's the line?
What research? I mean, I think
I know what's on my line.
Right, brook and brown trout are the biggest eaters of their own eggs, from what I understand. Right, as far as fish go, and so are you really doing any harm? Are you just by picking up an egg eating fish? It's just like, I mean, that's their food source.
Matching the hatch.
So how close can you get to that spawning fish?
Yeah, I think, Austin, your question right there kind of goes at the heart of this whole thing. If you can avoid the fish, do it. And that's what Bill did. And that's what I'm going to do. And I've said this before. It takes angler discipline. It takes some self-discipline. You got to find your own line. And for us, we're saying we won't fish over the spawning trout. And we're kind of talking about how we're going to give them space, right? We can get into more of that, how to not disturb fish that are spawning. But I'm not staying off the water because I like fishing. And because I also believe I'm not doing any significant damage, if any, more than I would if I'm just fishing any other day of the year. And I'm also learning many things by being out there during the spawn and learning what I should be avoiding, those areas of reds, throughout the rest of the season. So I don't want to stop fishing. And so that's where I draw my line. And I know how I can avoid those trout because they're not spawning everywhere in our rivers. And then it takes some self-discipline. This is the truth. I know where those fish spawn every year because often, the gravel doesn't change unless you get significant flooding and places washed out. The gravel in our area is almost, those trout go to the gravel, which is in the same areas every year, and it's very predictable. It's not almost predictable. It's very predictable. I know by now where I can see, some 20-inch fish on some of our rivers that don't hold those,
Right.
that I hardly ever catch them. And then even some, 20 to 24-inch fish in some of our other rivers where, they're very hard to find. And so they're right there. They're right there, and I'm looking at them. But I won't fish for them. And that doesn't make me better than anybody else. But I have some self-discipline. I won't do it. And so I think here I'm on my soapbox, right? But I think what a lot of people, and I'll even say part of the industry, will tell people, like, just stay off the water. Hey, when they're spawning, you shouldn't be out there. I think they tell them that because they're babysitting them a little bit, and they're saying, well, that person, hey, the average angler isn't going to have enough self-discipline. Let's just tell them stay off the water. I don't think that's fair. We've been through this before about other things, have enough, I think, respect for the average angler to educate them about what the spawn is, maybe what the damage you could do to the resource by fishing for those spawning fish, and then have some trust in them that with that information, they'll have the self-discipline to move on. But it's hard, I suppose, at first. It's almost like catch and release. I grew up keeping everything, right? And so I do remember those first few fish. We were on Crooked Creek. That's not a spot burn. And I remember releasing those first couple trout and going, this is kind of hard, but I'm letting them go. Okay, I let it go. Anyway, it's kind of like that. You go, well, I'm passing them up. There's 2 nice trout on there. Now I know they're in a river. It makes me excited to know that they're in that river. Now I'm going to catch them, a month from now in December, January. Maybe they'll still be in the same area.
Well, what I like about the point you make, Dom, is just that it takes a deeper look into the issue to fully understand it. And I think if you fish during the spawn responsibly and learn and have a much better idea of where fish spawn on the rivers that you fish, you also have a way better chance of not disturbing the buried reds after the spawn. Whereas if you just are going to cut out that particular part of the year You're not going to learn anything more that there is to know about the spawn. I know many anglers who have no idea that there's any danger to those reds beyond the spawn. And I think that just comes from this superficial version of avoiding fishing during the spawn that we're fed, like you said, that we're kind of fed by maybe the industry, maybe whatever it is, whoever's prerogative it is to keep people off the river. I think that I'm not insinuating that anyone's intention is wrong, but I think the method is wrong, and it sort of it treats the average angler like a simpleton.
Yeah. And I think it also, along those same lines, Trevor, it's like every fish is spawning in your river in every section.
Yes.
Which is simply not the case.
Yeah. Right. No, that's the wrong assumption.
You've already touched on gravel, that kind of easy substrate to dig a bed into. Maybe shallow to knee water or knee high water is what we're going to be looking for in caution to reds. But they're not going to be in hard, fast running water that's deep and big and bouldery and more extreme. Those fish that live in that and spend their days in that water, they're not digging reds, they're not laying eggs, and they're not spending time in there doing anything like that.
I think it's easy to avoid those sections. Like you said, Matt, I could be on a brand new river and I don't know those places, but after so many years on the water, I know where they're going to spawn, and so I don't fish those areas. Precision Fly and Tackle is a family-owned business with a passion for the outdoors and a sense of adventure. They are anglers who enjoy every moment spent on the water with family and friends. Precision Fly and Tackle carries the widest selection of Euro rods, reels, lines, leaders, flies, and accessories. From the beginner to the advanced angler, Precision Fly and Tackle can outfit every angler, no matter the budget. Visit them online at precisionflyandtackle.com. Then use code TROUTBITTEN10, that's the number 10, for 10% off your order. Gear up with Precision Fly and Tackle for your next adventure. For over a decade, Smith Creek's high-quality fly fishing accessories have helped anglers just like you to keep your gear in easy reach, free up your hands, and keep our waters clean. Their award-winning Rod Clip Plus now has 2 ways to attach it to your vest or pack, making it easier to tie a fly, change a hook, or release your catch. All Smith Creek products are built guide tough, using rugged materials, and backed by their strong commitment to customer service. This fall, Smith Creek is introducing even more new products, so keep checking their website at smithcreek.co for more information and special offers from now through Christmas.
I want to backtrack a little bit and clarify my egg on the line comment, because I want to elaborate on it for out here. So we have 2 species of spring spawners.
Yeah, rainbows.
And so rainbows and cutthroats. Okay. And so those fish, I'm going to go back to what I said about fishing a run. If I know there's a high an area that's congregating with brown trout, it's just as likely that the deep run below it is full of cutthroat and rainbows eating those eggs.
Oh yeah, their own eggs.
Yeah, right. Well, the brown trout eggs. So that's maybe one thing different than that we have out here. We have 2 species that are abundant in the rivers that aren't spawning. Right? Like the reverse doesn't happen in the spring when the rainbows are spawning and people are fishing egg patterns for the brown trout, right? Because the browns aren't spawning, they're eating a hatch. I mean, let's face it.
Yeah.
It's a localized egg hatch.
Yep.
And so some of my issue with it out here is like, I'm fishing for rainbows and cutthroats. I'm not fishing for those brown trout in that area of loose gravel that we all know they're spawning. But there's maybe more rainbow trout in the river than brown trout. So why can't I target them fair game? Right. Anyway, that's kind of where I'm at with the egg pattern, because Bill said he might not fish an egg pattern, but for me, I'm targeting, rainbows and cutties on an egg. So I don't know if I justify that or whatever, but that's kind of what my approach can be. And look, the egg bite's not all over the river, right? I mean, you might find certain areas that are better than others. I wouldn't say it's one of my go-tos, like maybe back home throughout the winter months.
Sure.
And then the other piece I was going to mention, just more so for the Western angler, is, and Dom, you alluded to it. You have, I guess this is there's a lot more to this than what I'm going to say, but when the cutthroats and the rainbows are spawning, the fry is active during the highest concentration of weight anglers that the West will see all season long. So those reds are susceptible to the same issue that brown trout reds could face in the winter and the fall, and the populations flourish. Right? So I don't know how, and look, I'm not condoning or telling people to march and everything's fine. I'm just saying the facts are there's more Western weight anglers in the months of June, July, and August when that rainbow and cutthroat eggs are present in all those river systems. Yeah. That they seem to be doing just fine with that added pressure. So it's an interesting thing to think about.
Yep.
To all that, like whether you want to fish, to me, it comes down to sportsmanship. Like if Trevor and his wife are having a good time, they don't want me to come into the room and start throwing headbangers at them. Oh, they're going to get pissed off.
What?
And so
I don't know what that means.
And so you give you have to respect the trout, let them do their business. And, don't throw headbanger sculpins at them or eggs.
No headbangers. Now we can't throw big streamers?
No.
Bill, are you just going to throw midges at them then?
Yeah, it's okay.
The midges are okay.
And his Hodgmans.
What about the Austins? Austin, let me pin you down here. You ask us how far away.
Yeah.
What about how many feet? If you see some spawning trout up there, how far back behind them will you fish? Or to the left?
How far is the fish going to move to your fly? I mean, I think
can that fish see my fly?
That's a great point, Trevor. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I would comfortably fish. Right. I would comfortably fish as far away as I felt like wouldn't tempt that fish off the red.
And that's a better question than mine because everything's conditional, and in some areas they're going to move further. That's a good way to do it.
And we all know that those fish, maybe there's 2 spawning fish in a red, and there's a stack of 15 fish or a dozen fish behind them, picking up the eggs rolling down the stream and eating them. So when we make that cast, if those 2 spawning fish can't detect or sense or see our egg fly, maybe I'm just a couple feet away and I'm targeting the fish below them that are just intercepting their eggs. I don't really have a problem with that.
No.
So doesn't the same thing happen? I'll ask Deli this. I mean, don't you do the same thing in the spring when a different species is spawning with sucker spawns?
Oh, the sucker, yeah. Nobody has any respect for the sucker, though.
Yeah.
Because they're not a trophy fish, because it's not a big brown trout.
Yeah.
But it's right, because it's okay, though. But why is it okay? It's the same thing. It's just a different fish is eating behind another spawning fish.
So you'll fish eggs then, Deli?
There's just no Sucker Unlimited.
Sucker Unlimited.
There's no SU,
Not yet.
SU.
Gonna go buy that URL.
It is not our sport fish.
We need some shirts that say Sucker
I'm just trying
Unlimited.
to point out the hypocrisy.
Oh yeah.
In what happens.
No.
Not just for Bill, I'm just saying for everything. It's so then it goes back to the original question. If nobody held up a big brown trout in the month of October and November, would anyone give a about any of this?
I say no. It comes down to
I'm with you.
Yep.
People think it's cheating, and nothing makes people more irate than someone that they think is cheating.
That's true. That's why I hate the Patriots.
Nice.
We went through that last week. It's proven. They're proven.
Video
cheaters.
cameras.
It wasn't the deflated balls thing either. It's just go read the Sports Illustrated article. Anyway.
And maybe that's just it. I mean, maybe that we dissected what it truly is, and it's that fish is so elusive. And I'm going to say the 20+ inch brown trout most of the year.
Wild.
That people have the issue with it being easy, and I'm okay with that. Right? When it's that mindset, I'm okay with it to a degree, but there's a lot of just assumptions out there that any big trout caught in October and November is a red rated cheater fish.
Yeah, there are.
Can we all agree with that?
Yes.
I mean, that's it happens all month, right?
Yeah.
Now you'll start to see people that don't post, and then come come 2 months later, look at all these big fish I caught.
Right.
It wasn't during the spawn. It was just now.
A couple weeks ago.
That's a product of the industry.
Yeah.
And where we're at. You can't even post a fish. And Austin alluded to it, right? With the southern spawn happens. Our spawn is happening earlier than your spawn, So you can sit here and be like, okay, I caught this fish, on a cold water area, and there's some fish that really don't spawn out here until Thanksgiving. But the lower part of the rivers are wrapped up by November 1. So what if you caught that remnant big fish in the lower part of the system and you grip and grin it, and it was a red. It had a beat up bottom on it. It's just like, it had a scar from what it was doing, but I caught them in early November or early December, right? Who's to say I didn't?
Yeah, you said where we draw the line. I mean, when's it okay? How many weeks before the spawn should you stop then? How many weeks after? Because afterward, you're right, they got those scars on them. They'll have a dirty bottom. I love seeing that.
Yeah.
January, February, they still have it. It's all kind of torn up. That's sometimes. Cool. You go, ooh, I know what you were doing. Yeah. And it's neat. It's like they've been through some battle, especially the males,
Yeah.
We should have a full podcast on what they actually do during the spawn, too. We don't really have time for that would be tonight. Cool. Yeah. But it's neat to realize what they go through. Once again, by being on the water, you get to witness a lot of that and learn by seeing rather than just reading or just hearsay.
Right.
For sure. Back to the big fish thing, I think, let's say the average angler the time that they see the most big fish is during the spawn. And so when they see a fish being posted or on social media that is big, they're automatically just going to think, well, it happened during the spawn, because that's when they can see them most visually.
Sure.
Because they're in that skinny water.
Yeah.
But to me, it's motivation, right? You see that big fish and you're like, man, I thought this stream only held 15-inch fish.
That's right.
And then you're like, okay, there's another level of fish out here. And then let me, maybe my tactics aren't as good as I thought they were. Let me go back and reevaluate and maybe fish differently the next year, because every year I see this big fish, but I'm not catching it.
That's very much what inspired me to night fish. Among other things, I was like, man, there is a class of fish in here that I don't touch very often, if ever, and I thought, how do I catch them? And everybody would tell you, even night fish, you're going to catch bigger fish. I thought that would do it. In some ways it kind of did. And in many ways, nope. I haven't hit that mark yet, but it's inspiration. It's motivation.
Inspiration. And I think you can even use it as a tactic to hunt big fish, because what I like to look at, right, is you see the lengths that some of these fish travel and where they show up at. Yeah. And how long are they in the system prior to actually doing the dance? And for me, it's a game to try to tie in, okay, these 5 days traditionally in October host a large number of staging fish. This goes like, Dom, when is it not okay to target these fish? But there's a clear pre-spawn window where you find large trout in small creeks and tributaries. And if you do your homework, right, and you got boots on the ground, and maybe you did see those two big fish on a red one year, and you come back 2 weeks prior before the dance starts and you hook that big fish, to me, that's a tactic. I mean, that's all boots on the ground. That's education. That's learning your river systems. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
No, and you're doing it.
You're good at it, Grub.
It's learning.
Right. That's what we're out here to do, is solve those mysteries, solve those puzzles, use all the data that you can gather. And like Bill said, just be a sportsman about it.
Sure. I'm sure it's the same out there. But fish will winter over in some of those tribs. And I find if there's a small window in the spring where you can still get those big fish. And the only way I know that they're in there, is learning the systems and walking and seeing, oh man, look at those big fish that are spawning. They can linger in those systems until April, right? Until the water, they end up, or they're lake fish, right? Everyone's, you have a massive amount of lake fish that penetrate the systems, and they can linger, into the spring. So there's things you can use to your advantage to legit hook into some big fish if you're observant.
Right on.
So Matt, you kind of touched on that with fish moving out of the lakes in the West and fish moving dramatically in the West. from an Eastern perspective, I know in some of our streams we see that as well, but these big fish that show up once a year that Dom was kind of talking about, and we got to go out at night to catch them. How much of them in our local rivers are we seeing that are residents versus residents of other rivers that are moving? Mm-hmm. What's your guys' opinion on that?
It's a great question.
That is a great question. I feel like it depends a ton on the watershed and what available spawning exists and whether there are thermal pressures that drive them different directions. I think around here we have so much thermal influence with the springs and certain spring-fed streams, and then some streams that have more gravel than others. I think we see a lot of movement in certain waterways, and probably less in others that we could think about, that the fish predominantly stay in the same river to spawn that they typically live in.
And that's another really neat thing to kind of chart, to just kind of gather that data over the years. But like, for example, they don't spawn in there, in the actual river very much, right? They're up in those tribs a lot.
Yeah.
And then like Matt said, they'll stay up in there.
Yeah.
But around here, the river that's down the hill from me, they do almost all the spawning right in that river. But that said, they're in that 50-foot wide creek, right? And they do almost all the spawning right there. There are a couple tribs, but yeah, it's only like 5% of the water that they're using. Again, the gravel has to be just right. The water level has to be just right. It's easy to avoid that 5% of water. Matt, you have something?
Yeah. No, I'm just agreeing with you because I've been able to see it out here as well, where there's 2 miles of river. There's no action going on. There's no, reds of any sort.
Yeah.
Right. And so, who's to say you don't ambush this goes back to like justifying the fishing during the spawn, and you're fishing a 2 mile stretch of river in between maybe some famous spawning grounds or whatever, but you ambush a large trout that's moving into those areas. I don't see why there's any issue with that. Right. But then that just sometimes when that happens, you post the picture, the hate comes, right? Just naturally with it, that you couldn't have, there's no way you could have caught that fish legit, right?
Yeah.
To answer your question, Austin, I think every river system is different. I know a few river systems that it seems like they're vacant because the fish have migrated up into tributaries to spawn. And I've seen river systems as big, if not bigger, where they stay resident and they spawn, mostly in that river system. I think spend time on your river system and learn that, like Grob's saying, like if you're going to have high water through the winter and into the spring, a lot of times those fish that have migrated into those tribs to spawn will hang around because there's good water volume and there's good structure. And if you got your boots on the ground, maybe you can find a big hole in there, and then you can come back, after the spawn. They might, hole up there for the winter for a little bit.
Well, especially in your area, there's no thermal issues at that time. Right. So what better time than the winter and early spring for big fish in your area to find a new home temporarily, right?
Oh, yeah. There's also a lot of lake systems in PA, not necessarily the Great Lakes, but there's other lake systems that fish will run out of, whether they be brook trout or brown trout throughout the state. And those are most of the ones that I've tried to explore. They're in and out of those streams within like 3 or 4 days.
Wow. That's quick.
If you do see them, 90% of the time they're spawning. And so, it's crazy to see like a 2-foot fish in a 6-foot creek that's, inches deep, and it's spawning and its back is out of the water. And it's like, this fish looks like it's like a dinosaur playing in a puddle. And you're like, okay. But it's cool to see that.
It is. And then you have the self-discipline not to, what's the point, of like snagging it out of there or something? I never understood that.
You might as well just walk up and net it at that point. If it's in 6 inches of water and you want a picture with it, just walk up and net it. You do less damage probably.
Yeah, that's true. I know one response that we'll get, one complaint that we'll get is that people live in areas where there's a lot more angler pressure on a lot fewer rivers. So there's just such a concentration of anglers. And maybe in some of those areas, they also have the kind of rivers where they do kind of all collect in one area, the spawning grounds, not just spread out, up and down 20 miles of trout water, but like they're all right there. And then, people don't like seeing that. I wouldn't either. I've never really witnessed that, where people are just raping the reds at the spawning grounds. I've never seen that.
Yeah. And I think that'd be distasteful to all of us. I mean, and we're definitely, right. I hope
and
that people listening aren't thinking that we're advocating for that in any way.
Yeah. Right. So in those areas, I definitely would be in favor of shutting those areas down. If that's happening, I think, shut them down for that period of time.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think we're pretty reasonable about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. New York, I think within the last 10 years has opened up their season to fish. Like the Delaware River system, some of it used to close. And so it'd be interesting to understand why New York did that. Is it just to allow people to fish more, or did they do some studies on it?
Montana did it.
Did what now?
When I first moved out here, it was closed. I think it was like some places were closed November 1st through Memorial Day weekend.
But that's after your spawn, isn't it?
The brown trout spawn. I'm just saying they opened it. A lot of these rivers they opened up since I've been here, which is 10 years. And the interesting part is you're having that odd brown trout decline in regional areas, and that's where all this stuff gets momentum.
Oh,
right.
Gotcha,
Correlation. Closing it is the right thing when there's so many other factors with dewatering.
Yeah.
Warmer water than normal. You can't just pick one of those and pinpoint it, in my opinion. So you got to be careful, with that type of thing. But I agree with you guys in the sense of, look, if you have like 3 streams, there's not a lot, and the whole river system's dependent on a brown trout, and you can close that 6 weeks, that makes sense to me in that regard. But if you have a lot of water, multiple species, right? If you close it for the brown trout, you should close it for the rainbows and cutties too.
There you go. So no fishing.
Right. Well,
6 weeks out of the year.
All full circle. Guess what? Stop booking your trip to Montana.
That's right.
Because you shouldn't drop your boat anchor in the river.
That's right.
In June.
You might hit a red.
Busting reds.
Might hit a red.
Sorry.
Right.
That's the truth. Yeah.
There is just some awareness. Again, you kind of, we're trying to bust the hypocrisy, really, right? There's a lot of awareness that should be there. Stop making assumptions. Educate yourself, I guess, about especially your region, the waters you're fishing, what happens in your waters.
Yep.
And then decide where you're going to draw your lines, and then, have some self-discipline.
Totally.
Trevor, sometimes I'm flabbergasted by this whole thing, and I'm like, maybe archery hunters started this because they weren't allowed to, right? We're in the woods. And I would be the first to admit, I rarely fished in the fall because I was a hardcore archery guy.
Totally.
Like it just kind of wasn't something I did. And then Southwestern Pennsylvania didn't exactly have, much spawning at all going on.
Right.
I think the first time I saw spawning was with Dell, and I got a big fish, and I was oblivious to the whole thing. Like didn't know reds, right? Because I hunted,
right?
And then all these I'm like, do all these archery guys get all like jazzed up about the fact that there's all these big brown trout and they're giving their buddy or what?
That's right. They're not fishing, so they don't want you fishing.
That's right. Yeah, right.
But I mean, I was uneducated. I was an uneducated angler for a while, and I think that's kind of what we're harping on.
Yeah,
it's very, very important to actually spend time. The opposite of what some folks in the industry are telling you. You should go out, walk with awareness, and learn.
Yeah, don't just be a copycat.
That's important.
Right. Don't just be a copycat and start moralizing about fishing during the spawn, but educate yourself, draw your own lines like Dom said, and be able to live with what you decide to do. And I think we're advocating for an ethical approach, not targeting spawning fish, but also being okay with learning your waterway and fishing during the spawn in a way that doesn't impact the spawning fish and still keeps you on the water.
Yep. Year-round fishing. I mean, that's
year-round fishing.
That's what I love. That's what makes this area unique too. We can,
for sure,
we can do that. And we found a way to do that during the spawn without bothering the system.
Or just go muskie fishing. It's better in the fall.
There you go.
Muskie and trout have the seasons kind of flip-flop, right?
Is that right?
So muskie fishing is good now. Trout fishing will start to decline with the spawn. In May, when trout fishing is at its peak, muskie fishing kind of sucks because the muskie start to spawn.
Cool.
So there you go. Blow up your shoulder and go fish for muskie.
That's right. Maybe you'll save a trout by catching a muskie.
That's true too. Anything else, guys?
This may be a little late to mention now, but for any listeners that don't really know what a red looks like, or maybe not seen one, or know what kind of water a trout prefers to build reds in, maybe we should touch on that before we close it out.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So trout generally like to lay eggs and spawn in water that is not overly fast or forceful, or has a high gradient, but something that is more even paced, maybe knee deep or lower, that has soft gravel in it that they can dig their bellies into and make a bed to lay their eggs in and cover up. You'll often see a large or semicircle or full circle area that looks like it's freshly been like turned over almost. So there might be a bright spot amongst a larger, darker area of gravel, and that signifies that a trout has been working that gravel area to kind of create a spawning bed for itself, that it's been digging rocks out or gravel out, laying eggs into it, and pushing that gravel back over it. So you may see 2 or 1 trout on top of that circular area. You may be seeing no trout on top of that area. But if you see a clean, kind of bright area of gravel amongst what looks to be brown or dark gravel, that's a good area to stay away from.
For sure.
I think people are back to the uneducated stuff. But if you go back year in and year out, you're like,
right. If you didn't fish there, then you wouldn't know.
One thing I want to mention, Austin, just to piggyback on top of your description there, is that right after the eggs are fertilized, the female gets back in and covers the eggs over, and
a little bit,
and tries to bury them to some extent to protect them. And so a lot of times reds are way less visible than that. We see that bright patch as she's dug it out, but then as she kind of like gets above the red after the eggs are deposited and fertilized, sometimes those reds are way less noticeable.
Yeah.
Because she covers them back up, or she's trying to. So, I think it can be pretty sneaky. And that's back to all of our point about knowing kind of regions in the river where they're spawning. You may not see an obvious red later on in the season and in the winter and spring, and yet don't be too confident walking across gravel beds that time of year.
Exactly. So like maybe you get to March and you enter one of those parts of the river and you think, it's probably covered in reds at some points in these. I'm going to walk on these big rocks or something and walk around if you have to.
Especially once you know your rivers. You almost do it without thinking all winter long. You go, okay, I don't walk here. I don't walk here right now. We'll go out and around.
And that's the difference. It comes back to the discipline, right? Like you actually have to live that out. Yeah. It's one thing to talk about it and to say, the head knowledge of knowing, there's probably eggs in that water there some point. But it's another thing to tell yourself, I'm actually going to walk around this part of the water.
That's true. And you know what? We're saying it takes a long time to learn that. And you're going to have anglers out there who say, well, I'm just starting out. I don't know that yet. And I'm so afraid to walk on reds. Don't be. Right? I'm going to say don't be. The only way you're going to learn is being out there, being very observant. Right. And if you care about it, you're not going to do the wrong thing, But don't let yourself be limited, by that lack of experience. The only way you're going to get that experience is being out there.
You know what else you shouldn't do?
What's that?
I'll end on this.
What's that?
You don't need to post something on Instagram telling everybody you're the better person for not fishing during the spawn.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Don't
moralize. That's a good point. We should
but
touch on that.
There's people out there. Let's touch on that.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I'm putting it away for the season.
Yeah.
Like, good for you.
Hanging it up right now.
Yep. So
gonna give those trout a break.
Giving them a break.
Giving them a break.
Giving them a break.
This will be my last trip for a while.
Give me a break.
The last one. I'm done. Hanging it up.
Hanging it up for a while.
See you in 2025.
That shit drives me nuts. I guess it can go. It can go along with the water temperature thing. It's the same people.
It's the same thing.
I don't like it. I don't like it.
I'm better than you, and so I'm going to sit on the couch.
And I want to tell you about it.
What about me?
Now you're going to hear.
Don't forget about me.
That's right.
I'm still here, but I'm not fishing.
That is the joke, right? I'm still here. I caught this fish in the spring. I'm still here.
I'm still here.
I'm still here.
That's right.
Remember me? I caught big fish.
Yeah. Just thinking back to when I caught this fish.
I would give anything for 70 degrees right now.
Just a quick repost.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, the shameless repost
from last time I caught a big trout.
Yeah.
Can't wait.
I'll direct message that individual with a one-handed trout with eggs spewing out its butt.
Oh, no.
Hey now.
That's not what you do.
That's
Not what you
Come on,
do.
guy.
Trevor, let's hear it.
That's not what you say. Come on, man.
That's the original.
I see the lake guys now that are catching fish, like the bait guys.
Yeah.
And they're holding them up, and there's like eggs dripping out of them. And they're like, "Yeah, new egg sacs" or something like that.
Whole different world, right? Everybody's living in a different world. There's so many different things going on out there. And you can definitely be a little over-concerned and under-concerned about spawning fish.
That's for sure.
All right, there it is. Trout fishing and the spawn. So try to understand what's really going on out there. Try to learn what the trout do in your region, in your waters. Tune out some of the over-the-top rhetoric and drama that surrounds the spawning season. Make your own decisions and have the self-discipline to follow through. That's about it. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next week. Dr. Trevor Smith, will you read us out?
I will. Remember, the Trout Bitten Project is a free resource for all anglers. The Trout Bitten website hosts over 1,000 articles with endless stories, commentaries, tactics, tips, and more. Find what you like through the top menu and through the search page. Navigate by way of the categories and tags, too. Be sure to find the Trout Bitten YouTube channel, now featuring the Trout Bitten Tip Series, the Fish and Film Series, and the Trout Bitten Fly Box, all in collaboration with Wilds Media. Thank you for listening to the Trout Bitten Podcast. Please give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and leave a comment, because that really helps. Until next time, friends, fish hard, enjoy the day, and find your life on the water.
It's Halloween. It's like the Michael Myers chant. The Michael Myers chant. It's like the guy with a Michael Myers mask sitting on the bank, creeping Dom out.
Sniper. The sniper location.
Maybe I could even snag him.
Right.
You some bitch. That was cheating.
That's true. That's why I hate the Patriots.
And that happens.
Brings up another question that's just popped in my head.
It's like a dinosaur playing in a puddle.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
legit.